Wasn't sure it was ever going to happen, but we have the last spell news. Earlier today, Ishtar put out a brief but intriguing post about what comes next for the last spell, and it's time to talk about all of the nuance of that short little snippet that they gave us, talk about what we think it all means, and then do some kind of like further reaching hypothesizing about what the future could hold for the game. Either way, I'm very excited, but we need to begin with what they actually said. They said it's been a few months since the release of 1.0 of the last spell, and we cannot thank you enough for your commitment to the game. Since the launch in early access, more than 300,000 players have fought the knight alongside the mages. With your help, we've been able to improve the last spell each and every month during the early access, listening to your feedback, adapting the game based on both our insights and yours. We've added new maps, new and horrible monsters, more tools for your heroes, and also new buildings to diversify your choices. But that's not the end. Far from it, in fact. Starting next year, we are going to release DLCs for the last spell. Each DLC will have a specific theme that will be used to develop the additional content brought to the base game. We want to add new and fresh ideas to expand the possibilities of gameplay with your heroes. And that's all we're going to say today. Stay tuned. More information will be shared with you later on. So the blue part is the important part. Starting next year, we're going to be getting DLCs for the last spell. Each one of those DLCs is going to be aligned thematically around some type of concept with the hope of increasing the diversity and making the last spell more better. I do not think that this is a paradigm shift for Ishtar, though. I wanted to bring up the last 6 patches before the 1.0 release to remind everyone and also introduce those who hadn't seen them before the way that Ishtar has been operating. So in order of most recent to least recent, the last patch before 1.0 was the Master of Omens update, and this introduced omens that cross-cut the entire game. You could modify basically any part of the game through this new omens system. Before that, it was Highway to Elderlicht, which was the new map. The new map came with new mechanics, a variety of balance changes, etc. Before that, it was Fear the Lake, which was Lakeburg 2.0, that introduced the first kind of new school boss to the game, right? Not ignoring the dryads, but this was kind of like Nessie was really the new boss style, but it was also a set of changes to how production was handled in the game. Before that, even though there was the Economy and Panic update, this is where I believe production was changed so that when you upgraded one production building, you upgraded all production buildings. We also got Wall Panic in this particular update, much to everyone's chagrin. Before that, going way far back, was the damage rework and a new set of buildings. The damage rework was a massive balance change that affected basically every element of damage dealing in the game and created a much more rich capacity for doing hybrid builds because you no longer had to build either melee damage or magic damage. And then last, but certainly not least, the oldest update I bothered to go remember was the Over the Mist update, which introduced mist sensors and also introduced the new perk system. The old perk system was bizarre, and the new perk system is incredible in comparison. If you don't remember the old perk system, go way back to some of my old videos. It was very strange. But anyways, the point of me bringing all of this up is just to point out that I think they're already doing this, right? Each one of these has a specific theme. They're addressing one part of the game in kind of like specific detail. And oftentimes these changes are kind of cross-cutting across the game, right? So they pick one theme, but then within that theme, there are changes to all different aspects of it. So that covers kind of all the historical and what they've told us. Obviously, they haven't told us much, but I think there's enough for us to make some educated guesses and also for me to do a bit of wish listing because why not? So beyond here be conjecture, matey. Brace yourself. So first of all, themes. My assumption is that themes are going to be something that cross-cuts multiple aspects of the game to add to it, basically. So I think this can, but is not limited to including additions to weapons, additional weapon abilities, enemies and enemy abilities, new maps, new map mechanics, hero perks and stats, buildings and building abilities, new game mechanics or new systems. The list kind of goes on, but I think those are, to me, like the primary places where they might tweak things. And then the idea is just that when they pick a theme, that theme is going to touch some or all of these, and then there will be things that they will add in that space. If the theme is something that it makes sense to add a weapon that plays well with that theme, they'll probably do that. If their theme is really something that needs to be executed on a grander scale, maybe it's a new map with a new map mechanic that has some complexity that adds a new system to the game. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, I think, DLCs in general. So the purpose from my perspective of a DLC in this particular case is The Last Ball is a relatively inexpensive game. It costs $20, I think, on Steam right now. And it's hard for Ishtar to continue doing development on that game simply because they've kind of gotten the money that they were going to get out of the game. Largely, the hype has died down, etc. So a DLC is their ability to get more eyeballs on the game once again, do some more development, make some more money off the game, and kind of keep the game moving perpetually. So I hope that they take that approach. I will be very excited to give them their money, give them my money, in order to see them add new and exciting things to the game. One of the things that I'd like to point to as kind of like the exemplar for how to handle DLCs from my perspective is RimWorld. If you're not familiar, it's a colony sim game, not that important, but what it does is each update that they do as part of the DLC, they split into two pieces, what they consider to be core to the game, and then what's part of the DLC. And then the core part goes to everyone, and then the DLC elements go to those people who buy the DLC, right? And I think the reason that this is important is that you don't want to end up with a disparate or fragmented game. So I'll give you like a simple example. Let's say that they made a change to the game that changed the way that lasers work. Okay, lasers become a part of the game, and it happens that Death Ray on the magic orb is a laser. Then what I would love for them to do is they can have a whole bunch of laser weapons that you only get if you purchase the DLC, but Death Ray also has that mechanic associated with it and gets updated. So even people who don't buy the DLC still have the updated Death Ray laser. I think this is great because it gives people who kind of like own the base game the ability to get a taste of it, but you save things like maps, new weapons, totally new content for people who are funding the game through those DLCs. That's the way I hope that they approach it, and I hope that this allows them to kind of continue developing the game, because I think we're all excited about The Last Spell and we'd love to see it kind of develop further. So what happens next here is a whole layer beyond Conjecture. What I want to do is talk about a few things that I think it would be amazing if they addressed in the game, in the form of a few themes that I'd love to see them tackle. The first of these themes is ground effects. So I would love to see them add the abilities that add lingering effects on the ground. We'll say fire and acid. That trigger when enemies or players either walk through or in them. Right? So it's something that you have to path around. I think that would be really cool. They could add some new weapons like Molotov cocktail and acid sprayer to the game, which would be weapons thematically aligned to creating lingering effects. But they could also go back to abilities like scorching wave, fire thrower, acid spray, and update those to also have lingering effects associated with them. Another thing that they could do is they could add gear that provide immunity to lingering effects. So if you're wearing the right pants, maybe you can run through the acid or run through the fire. You could obviously create new enemies, maybe some variant of the boomer that blows up in a much larger area and creates like a scorched earth effect where you can no longer run through that space or can't safely run through that space. You could have the hopper's spit no longer give poison, but instead place poison under the feet of the enemy, or acid as the case may be. And then last but not least, you could have a map that is volcanic in nature, where you have random eruptions that make part of the map light on fire. I think ground effects could be really cool. You could have some really interesting dynamics. If they wanted to go full whole hog, there's those other RPGs where, like, if the ground is wet, then lightning would do extra damage or those types of things. That might be a bridge too far. Also in the space of ground effects, I think they could do some interesting things with weather. I've heard people talk about weather before. I think it could be a cool thing to add to maps where there could be rain, there could be acid rain, there could be fire rain, those types of things. But moving on to the next one, I think movable entities would be insanely awesome, right? Heroes and enemies can now be moved by select abilities. Right now, when it is your turn, all of the enemies are completely static. And when it is the enemy's turn, all of your heroes are completely static. I think it would be super cool if you could throw an enemy into another enemy, maybe do damage when you did that. Because of so many of the mechanics like traps and corpse piles, they've laid a foundation of a desire to be able to move enemies more effectively, but they have not given us the ability to actually do it. In terms of weapons or weapon-like things, I think you could have some type of battering ram. You could have a juggernaut shield that gives you some type of push type of effect. And then I also think it would be a great opportunity to update some abilities like ground smash. Imagine if when ground smash hit that plus of enemies, it also created a shockwave that pushed out all the enemies in an immediate circle around them type of thing. Maybe doing damage if those enemies hit other ones. I think you could do something really interesting with that. I also think it's a great opportunity to take a weapon that is, from my perspective, rather boring and lacks identity, the one-handed hammer, and make it all about knocking enemies around. Make smash its primary attack have a 1 knockback associated with it. So it becomes the ultimate moving enemies thing. You could also create some pants that prevent enemies from moving. You could have enemies that are immovable. But I also think that it would be really interesting to, as part of this, create enemy siege equipment that enemies push. So now you have a movable entity, right? Like a battering ram or a catapult on the enemy side or something like that. And then you could have a specific enemy whose job is to push it each turn to get it closer and closer to you. So if you kill all of the enemies that can push it, it becomes kind of defunct and can't do anything. The last piece of this movable entities concept, from my perspective, is you could have a map that has a mobile haven, right? Imagine like a last spell on tracks, like almost like a train level, where your job is to escort it through a map. You can't rely on static defenses, and each wave you have enemies maybe coming in from the forest on either side of the tracks that you need to defend in order to keep it moving. I think that could be really cool. But that's it for movable entities. Next up is Gear 2.0. I think that more variety in terms of what a gear slot means could add a lot of depth to the game. What I mean by that is helmets and pants seem largely interchangeable in their current form. They're just stats, basically, right? They have some attributes, pants have armor, etc. But like for the most part, they aren't that different. So I'd love to see each of the gear slots have a bit more differentiation. I also think that gear sets could be a big part of this. I didn't write that down here, but gear sets are cool in other games. And there's something interesting about the trade-offs of, if I take 2 pieces of the Slayer gear set, I get some bonus, but I'm missing out on, say, a better pair of pants, for instance. My rough thoughts here are that pants could be immunity focus. Helms could be like perception focus. Like imagine you could put on a certain type of helm and all of a sudden mist sensors don't actually prevent your vision, or elite enemies that are misty don't prevent your vision. I'd also love to see trinkets all have activated abilities. I think that's kind of like, for me, the class identity of a trinket is that it always does a little something. It's a garage door opener, or or it's like the Fey boots or something like that. And then I'd love to see shields have non-damaging enemy manipulation abilities. We talked about shove already on something like a juggernaut shield, but it would be cool for shields to have some defensive identity associated with them. And I think gear is a huge part of this game, so getting the gear system more depth and more exciting and more interesting little nuances that you can play with is only good for business. Next up is one that I've already covered. If you're interested in seeing me talk about it for like half an hour, check out my video, Patch Notes Return of the Ballista. It will be linked below for more details. But the idea is generally to shift defenses away from being damage-based to being utility-based. Ishtar has said they don't like the current state of things. They tried nerfing ballistas significantly. People hated the nerfs. They rolled them back mostly. And I think they just need to make them more cool while they take away the damage. And my thought for that was to do something with like catapults becoming a tar launcher. So like AoE stun. If you had the lingering effects, you could make it land a blob of tar that enemies would have to walk through and slow them down. Ballistas could be some type of stun type of thing, like net launcher that stuns an enemy when it comes in. So they're reducing panic, but not necessarily doing damage. I'd love to see damage traps changed into lure traps. I think it would be amazing to be able to control the way that enemies move a little more effectively. And I think that that could be really cool. Right? Enemy walks over to the lure trap, then they get poisoned type of thing. Snare trap becoming spike strips. This could be another type of lingering effect where every time an enemy walks over it, they become snared. And stun traps could become shrapnel traps that remove armor and block. So you get a bulky on one of those stun traps, or excuse me, one of those shrapnel traps, and then all of a sudden they're a lot easier to take care of. There could also be a total overhaul of the way that Fortress Master and the defensive perk tree work to make the kind of play better together. I also think it would be really cool to add some type of gear improvement building. Maybe this fits better with the last theme, but like an enchanter that allows you to reroll stats on particular pieces of gear. Could be really fun and interesting and a great way to spend gold that isn't just rerolling the shop a trillion times. The last kind of like core idea is I'd love to see game modes added. Endless mode, I am of two minds about. I think that endless mode could be really awful and you might just play it once and be like, this is the worst thing ever. But there is something fun about kind of like the idea of a random procedurally generated type of thing, right? Maybe you get a couple Knights of Lakeburg, then a couple Knights of Elderlicht, but it's all on the Glintfine map, or who knows what kind of form it takes, but just essentially taking the stuff that they've developed and mashing it up in weird ways. I'd also like to see kind of like a puzzle direction potentially, like maybe they could have a daily challenge where you come in and you only play one knight. Right? You come in and everything's already set up. Your haven is built the way it is. You're in the deployment phase. You have the number of heroes that you have. The wave is preset and you have to defeat the wave to succeed, and you get score based on how little panic you generate and a variety of other factors. I also think it would be cool to have persistent hero teams, right? So hypothetically, rather than, you could recruit a set of heroes, but you could have presets for what they look like. You could potentially have a hero team that always goes into the daily challenge. So if you're getting 3 heroes, you have your standard 3 heroes for the daily challenge. Quick play mode could go in the same category as daily challenge, but I think it would be useful. And then the last thing here, and this is perhaps its own theme, but I just wanted to toss it here, is I think the apocalypse system needs an overhaul. I would love to see it just kind of rolled into the omen system where you have positive and negative omens. And rather than having an omen allotment for each map, by taking more negative omens, you can then take more positive omens. So maybe you can go for like a whole bunch of positive omens, but you have to take double elites, 40% larger waves, miss sensors, and, the boss spawns with, invulnerability for 5 turns or whatever it happens to be. But the idea is make it a little more composable. I've seen other games do this very effectively. I think Slice and Dice is a great example of how to do kind of like a difficulty system where you take positives and you take negatives and they kind of balance out. Whew. So that's all my kind of concept ideas here. Just some interesting things that I think could all be themes that they could build DLCs around. Ishtar, if you're watching, feel free to borrow any of these. No need to give me credit or anything like that. I'm just excited to see the game kind of getting some improvement. And last but not least, and perhaps the most important, and it sounds like Ishtar if Ishtar is serious about the last spell being an enduring game, modding support is the greatest way to create this game to have a life of its own beyond. beyond this point. So the things that I think would be critical for modding support is obviously like APIs. They need to just build it so that there is a modding framework, because there is not one right now. There's just the Last Stand DLC, not the Last Spell, the Last Stand DLL, excuse me. And you can make modifications to it, but there's not a lot of modularity to it. I would love to see a map editor. I tinkered around a lot with the maps in my last corpse guide and my last and my video after that, which was my maps ranked guide. If you want to check out those, they're around. But yeah, the maps are relatively easy to generate. It would not be hard to make a map editor, and I think it would be a huge, easy win that they could get right off the bat. I think simple tooling for gear creation would also be relatively easy. Like, there's nothing particularly complicated about saying that a helmet has 16 crit, as an example, as a baseline. So creating those and injecting them in would be pretty easy. I also think a sandbox mode would be super beneficial. Like some type of developer mode where you can just go in and you can spawn a hero, give them some gear, spawn a bulky, have the bulky hit them in the face. There would be a lot of interesting things that could come with that, especially if they had kind of a modding framework. But it would extend the life of the game more so than anything else. But anyways, that's it for me. I just made a 22-minute video about 2 paragraphs that they posted, but I'm really excited that they posted those 2 paragraphs, and I wanted to share some of my ideas with you. So if you liked any of these ideas or you have your own, please leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to read all of your ideas, and who knows who might be lurking. But for now, that's going to be it for me. Thank you to everyone who has hung out, who supports me, etc. If you like this video, leave a like, toss me a subscription if you want more videos like this, but I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.